Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to These Go to 11. Once again, I'm Nathan Bell. Joining me as always, Zach Bartles. Zach, what's going on, man?
Dude, I'm feeling sheepish over here in light of our topic today that I spent the last 25 minutes reading in different Reddit threads about different methods to get the TV to automatically turn on when you're building your own Pac-Man arcade machine, which is something I'm pursuing at the moment.
Well, that is definitely in reference to our guests we're going to have on. But before we get there, first, we want to mention Missional Wear, because we love those guys over there. They put out great products. So make sure you're checking out missionalwear.com. They're always putting up new stuff, always coming up with new ideas. Zach, you recently over at Gut Check had your T-shirt published on your little page there on Missional Wear, and then you can get your book through them too, correct?
They've got the smoking guide, yeah. I think.
Guide.
I don't know if it's up. I don't know what's going on with Missional Wear. You say we love them. I like them. You know, it'll be love when I get another. When I get a nice fat gift card in the mail, then I'll love them. My love can be bought, and I would like my love to be bought. So.
Nice. But not only do you have tons of books over there with Gut Check, recently you published two of them, really, because you have the Clinch book, which is an adult nonfiction or an adult fiction book that you just put out. What was it, about 2 months ago? You finally released it paperback?
Yeah. It's a young adult book, yeah.
Yeah, so definitely check out Clinch if you listen to the Clinch podcast. Zach does a whole read-through of the book, which is fantastic, so definitely pick that up. But you just recently put another one out, and it's up on Amazon, which is the Cobra Kai, Strike First, Strike Hard, No Mercy, and it's a book on sanctification. So, Zach, I want to give you a little bit of time here to talk about that one and just hit the high points for the listeners.
Right, and this is why you have half a dozen podcasts, so that you have built-in platform for self-promotion. It's very, very recently been put out, meaning that it comes out tomorrow.
Nice.
So it can be pre-bought. So you're hearing this like an hour away from, if you're listening to it when we drop, from when it's available. But you can hit pre-buy on Cobra Kai and Sanctification, and let me tell you how incredibly well this book is doing, Nathan. It was the number one new release in everybody's favorite category on Amazon, which is television, criticism, and history.
Nice.
And I know a lot of people were vying for that position. There was a book about Mr. Rogers. There was a book by that one guy on the Carol Burnett show whose name escapes me. And so, it's basically just dominating that one small sub category. But the book is about the idea that in our sanctification, particularly in the mortification of the flesh, we tend to be Daniel LaRusso's, meaning that we are whiny and sniveling and always trying to talk our way out of things and make friends and stuff. When we really need to be Johnny Lawrence's. We need to be Cobra Kai. So I go through, it's about 20,000 words, just ebook only. It's a short read. But I go through Strike First and Strike Hard and No Mercy, quoting a lot of John Owen, a lot of Spurge, a lot of Thomas Watson. And then I take people through, and this is a deep cut. You tell me if you remember this.
All right.
Through the quicksilver method of training. Which is, if your enemy cannot see, he cannot fight. If your enemy cannot breathe, he cannot fight. And if your enemy cannot stand, he cannot fight. And that's from Mr. Terry Silver in the worst movie ever made, The Karate Kid Part 3. But still part of the Karate Kid and Cobra Kai mythos. So you got to lend it credence.
That's all right.
That's something you can pick up if you haven't already pre-bought it on Amazon or on BarnesandNoble.com. And I haven't even linked to it on Gut Check. It's just a little fun ebook thing, and it harkens back to simpler times when a lot of people were like, hey, you can actually just make an ebook of something and still do well with it, right. Which turned out you really can't, but oh well, I'm trying it anyway. It's just for fun.
Nice. Well, we will definitely link that up when we do the show notes tonight, so I'll make sure that happens. Don't want to belabor our guest and have him put off there because I'm really excited to talk with Gret Glyer about global poverty. Gret, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Very pleased to be here, and very pleased to hear that there's another Karate Kid fan, although I'm wondering if you really think the third movie was worse than the fourth movie.
Well, there's no fourth movie. Shut your mouth.
We just don't talk about it.
Are you talking about a movie with some Zen bowling in it? I've never heard of it. Nope.
Oh, there was.
Oh, man, nice.
I will say this before we get into things depressing, and that is that my son, Calvin, who's 10 years old, I asked him, he's at a locker for the first time in his life. Just first day of school today. I said, what do you want to put in your locker? He's like, I want a Cobra Kai poster. So,
I must be proud.
Got a little Cobra Kai poster going and a little Mewtwo Pokemon guy. So that made me happy.
Nice. Well, I want to give a little bit of background because, Gret, I'm going to let you kind of give your bio in just a couple minutes here. But we first had a recommendation from one of our listeners who follows us about how you should join the podcast. And then even before I had a chance to kind of get up and respond and get in contact with you, one of the former hosts of this show, Steve Hartland, started engaging with you on some things on Twitter, which was interesting. And so after I kind of looked in and saw that little engagement, I was like, yeah, sure, why don't we go ahead and have him on? And so you and I got in contact that way. When people ask how we get our guests and things like that, it's amazing how things just kind of spiral, and we are connected to the World Wide Web where we can get a hold of so many people in so many different ways, and I find that really interesting. And of course, I know that on this podcast, Zach, you and I have talked about social justice before, and we've talked about, being the body of Christ and actually going out there and, putting our faith into action. And so I thought this would be interesting just to widen people's minds and perspectives on this topic of global poverty. So, Gret, why don't you go ahead and just give our audience your background and credentials, so to speak, so that they have an understanding of where you're coming from.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. And again, thanks for having me on. I'm glad that we can have this discussion. I love the premise of your show that you talk about things that are not talked about on Sunday morning. I'd love to ask you a few questions about that later on. But as far as my background goes, so I'm 28. I graduated from college in 2012. I spent a year working at a corporate job where I was working like 12 hours a day. Really didn't enjoy it, but I performed really well. I was promoted super quick, and then I just said, like, I can't do this. This isn't for me. I gotta find something else. And so that's when I moved to Malawi, Africa. I lived there from 2013 to 2016. I did all sorts of poverty alleviation work while I was there. It was very meaningful, and it was a complete change, like a complete 180 from the corporate life, and I really enjoyed that. But one of the things that I found out while I was over there was, one, global poverty exists. Like, there's a lot of poor people, and they're really, really poor. And I don't think I quite understood that or quite grasped it until I actually lived over there for a significant amount of time. So the first thing was I realized it existed. And then the second thing was I realized that it was really hard to communicate the realities of poverty back to my friends in the States. Like, I was trying to tell them about some of the things I was seeing. And most of the time when that happened, I got this kind of like glazed over look. It's just too hard to comprehend. It's like describing a different planet or something when you have such a wealth disparity between that side of the world and this side. And so then I'm in this spot where I really want to do good. I want to bring my friends into doing good, and I have to figure out a way to do that. So that was when I started, and I founded an organization called DonorSee, Donor SEE. It's an app, and you can go to DonorSee.com and check it out. And it's a way for people to see where their money goes when they donate. They can see how very small amounts of money make a gigantic impact in people's lives, typically people who are living in extreme poverty. And so DonorSee launched 2 years ago, and I run it to this day. We're in over 50 countries, and it's a very gratifying thing to be a part of. And I also Also, the last thing I'll throw out there is I think the reason I got invited onto this podcast is because I just launched my own podcast, the Gret Glyer podcast. And on that podcast, I talk about this, like global poverty and those kinds of things all the time.
Nice. So let me ask you, Gret, what was it about what you were doing? I mean, like what specifically was making you unhappy in the job you were doing to kind of force such an extreme change to move over to the other side of the world and start with, helping with relief efforts and things like that. I mean, normally, like I think of, 20-somethings and they're unhappy, they tend to switch into a new job and there's kind of this process. You almost had more of an extreme change, and I'm just curious of how that came about and the process you made in kind of jumping over there and doing that.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I don't think that my experience was uncommon. I just think my action was uncommon. Like, I think there's a lot of people who kind of get thrust into the quote unquote real world, and they find it very uncomfortable, or they're just like unsettled by it. But I think over time they just kind of learn to accept it for what it is, and it's just part of life, and you just kind of go with it. And for whatever reason, I just I think I don't want to. I almost like don't want to like say it was me. I think I was fortunate enough to be in a place where I could drop everything and go overseas. Not everyone has the ability to do that or is in the position to do that. Like one of the things about my place at that moment was all of my student loans were completely paid off. My parents were kind enough to do that. So like I was in a position to go overseas and I was able to do it, and I found an opportunity to do it. And there was just like all these things that lined up. So I think there's a lot of people who feel that like unsettledness and like, oh man, I really wish I could be doing something more meaningful. And I think when it comes down to what was unsettling me, it was this idea that I was doing a job where if I didn't show up the next day, like almost nothing would change. They would replace me with another person, and then that person would come along and do the same job. And I thought, this is not going to fulfill me for the next 20 years of my life. So.
Now, you said you just actually started a podcast on this. How many episodes have you gone into so far?
So I think we just did our 10th episode, and some of that is recordings from other podcasts. Some of that is me interviewing other people, and some of that is just me solo talking into the mic. So yeah, it's a combination of everything. So yeah, okay. But pretty new.
Nice. Talk to us about what you experienced overseas and some of the change and things like that occurred and happened. I mean, when you got off, was it, huge culture shock, or was it, something where things were taking time to develop as you were getting into the culture and learning the things that you were learning, seeing the things that you were seeing? Talk to us about that overseas experience.
Sure. So when I first got over there, initially I went over there to be a math teacher. So I was teaching high school math at an international Christian school. And it was just to high school students. Half of them were like upper class Malawian students, and the other half were just like missionary kids or kids from the like embassy kids or whatever. And so it was just, it was like one of the things that was shocking to me. I was going to the poorest country on the planet, and everyone has seen movies. I assumed like there'd be lions and grass thatched huts, and like that's all. I assumed I'd be living in something like I don't know why, but that was like my conception. And so when I got over there and I realized I had like not high speed, but I had internet, I had hot running water, I had electricity, I had all these different things. I realized that there was more development in these parts of the world than I assumed. And so, yeah, originally I went over there to be a math teacher. And, as I spent more time over there, there were several like key aha moments that helped me realize, like when I first got over there, I almost didn't realize how poor, I still didn't realize, like truly grasp how poor the world was. And so, the longer I spent over there, I had a few key moments. Like I remember there was this one little girl I met, her name was Emily, and she must have been 5 or 6 or 7 years old at the time. And I would go into this village every Friday, and I would play soccer with the people there, and that was like a very fun thing that I would just do every Friday. But there was this little girl who would come and watch, and someone told me her story, and it's a really sad story. Unfortunately, her mom got really sick, had gotten really sick several years ago, and a friend of mine, his name was Blessings, another Malawian guy, he sent a message to his friend in the States saying, hey, this girl Emily's mom is really sick and she needs to go to the hospital, so would you mind sending me $20 so I can take Emily's mom to the hospital? And the guy in America, not understanding the seriousness of the situation, he said no. He just thought, he didn't really know Blessings that well, and he thought that Blessings was just kind of, he was doing... There's a certain reputation in regards to corruption when it comes to sending money over to people in Africa. And so he said no. Okay, so 6 months later, this guy who Blessings had messaged in the States went on a short-term mission trip to Malawi and took a tour of this village. So Blessings was giving this guy a tour through the village, and along with everyone else there, and they come across this lady who's just kind of like writhing in pain on the ground. And Blessings didn't mean to bring them in front of this lady, but it just so happened. And so the guy says, wait, who is this person? Why is she on the ground? And of course it was Emily's mom. And Blessings explained that because she didn't have $20 to go to the hospital, she has just been in pain this whole time. So, okay, then they spend the entire short-term mission trip becomes around helping this lady, helping Emily's mom get better. So they get her a mattress and they get her a bunch of medicine. They take her back and forth to the hospital. And at the end of it, they've done everything that they can do within that 2-week time frame. So then they hop on a plane, they go home, they buy her a bunch of medicine and stuff to take with her. And their plane lands, and within 24 hours, unfortunately, Emily's mom passed away, and Emily's dad was no longer in the picture. So I met this girl Emily, who's a real life person whose mom died because she couldn't afford $20, and that was one of the first of many aha moments where I realized that things in the rest of the world are very, very different and just totally outside of my ability to understand them as someone who grew up in this part of the world.
Now, when you talk about the kind of self-oversight that takes place when somebody gives money and then sees a result, how do you pair up with the right nationals to get that done? I assume part of the deal is low overhead. You haven't said that, but it just sounds like kind of that's part of the model. Am I right?
Yeah, that's
I
right,
get $40, 38 of it isn't going to printing glossy posters and paying people's salaries.
Right.
Well, I mean, you laugh, but I belong to a denomination where I'm starting to really worry about a lot of our giving toward this kind of stuff, how much of it really gets there. But how do you...
worried about that.
Yeah, well, how do you connect with... How do you short circuit that and end run that and connect with the right people? Because that happens out of just institutionalization and a slow slide despite good intentions. How do you avoid winding up with funding people who might just want to get a hold of money and hey, look at me, I feel better now.
Right, so what you're referring to, it's this hierarchical structure that develops as these charitable organizations get bigger and they get older. So as more people, take a World Vision, for example, or the Red Cross or whatever you want, literally any of them that you want to pick. As they get older, they get bigger and they have more middle managers, and there's more money there's more oversight, and there's more centralization, and there's more bureaucracy. And for every dollar that's spent, they have to do all sorts of different things to make sure it's working. But at the end of the day, the people who are making decisions are living in America, and the people who are being affected by those decisions are living on the other side of the world. And then on top of all that, you've got compassion just being completely extracted out of the equation, right? So people aren't the person who's compassionate in giving the money. It first has to flow through a giant organization, but before it ends up in someone's hands. So, and the people who are executing on the aid on the other side of the world, they're just a hired hand. And it's
unless the organization's called Compassion.
And then you have and so actually that brings up another point that we could talk about, but branding is basically what charities have become extremely good at. It's their best thing that they can do, because their brand is what determines whether or not you give to them, and almost nothing else. Like the effectiveness, the level of oversight, the transparency, really nothing matters besides how you feel about the brand. And so if you have a brand called Compassion that feels really good, and you can give to them and not hold them as accountable as maybe they should be held. Okay, so you asked about how we're different. So what we talked about is there's this hierarchical structure that develops over time. What's cool about DonorSee and a lot of other companies that are being started nowadays is that they've developed this new kind of decentralized way to do things, right? So let me give you an example that people can really understand, and then I'll tell you how it applies to DonorSee. So in the past, there used to be these really large taxi companies, and there would be a bunch of middle managers, and they would have taxis go all throughout New York, but there was one central office that was making the decisions for all of the taxis all over New York. And then Uber came along, and Uber said, we're going to create a platform where we're going to match up drivers with people who need rides. And because we're doing that, we're able to charge way less money, and we're able to be way more efficient, and we're gutting all of the unnecessary stuff that was formerly part of this system. And instead of having a giant bureaucracy oversee each and every taxi, we're going to have the whole thing be regulated by the crowd. So someone goes on a ride and they give a 5-star review, and then you know whether or not that person is trustworthy in the future. Okay, so that's how, and there's all sorts of, eBay is doing that, Airbnb, you name it. There's like 16 different types of these two-side marketplaces, and they're all doing this in their different ways. So DonorSee is a two-side marketplace in the same way. So there's people who post projects, and then there's people who donate to those projects. And then we almost have like this third category of people that kind of do research on them and hold them accountable and write reviews for them. And so through all of that, we're able to take out a lot of the, like, first of all, I as the CEO get paid $0. I have a Patreon where people support me, but I get paid nothing. And then we are like all of the hyper regulatory accounting stuff, the lawyers, like we don't have to do any of that stuff because we're completely circumventing traditional models and having money go directly from donors to recipients and then being regulated by the crowd.
Okay, but how do you? I mean, like, do people sign up then on the other end? So if I'm in Johannesburg or wherever I am and I'm in need of something, how does that person find their way to you?
Okay, so the best way to think about it is not anyone can just like post a project, right? There would be huge problems with that if we allowed that. So the way it works is people apply to post with our organization, and usually they're part of some kind of grassroots organization, or they're part of a larger organization like Cure International is one of the organizations that we work with. And so one of these organizations, they apply to post on DonorSee. If they're approved, they get access to our donor base. And so they go through this like rigorous application process. If they make it through the process, then they're allowed to post their first project. When it gets funded, people can vet whether or not it went through. And then at the end of the day, if they kind of make it through the crowdsourcing system, they can raise quite a bit of money on a monthly basis. But yeah, so there's a whole application process that goes into it. Okay. Yeah, and so the people who are being helped are not the ones who are signing up to post projects. So there's storytellers. They're the ones who are posting projects, and they're the ones who are on the ground, basically on the ground aid workers, just like I was when I was in Malawi.
I see. Now, you're a Christian, I assume.
Mm-hmm, yes.
And when you talk about, you didn't say this is the new model that's going to take over, but when you talk about Uber and Airbnb, I think we're moving toward this. People connecting over networks rather than through these sluggish and bloated organizations. I assume the vision you have, and maybe I'm wrong, is that this kind of fills a gap, takes a place of a World Vision type thing, but not a life missionary type situation. Like someone who's actually working for a mission agency. I know a number of people, somebody right now who's in Thailand, several who are in South America, 4 or 5 who are in Kenya. Rather than replacing them, this would actually become, in a sense, a resource for our missionary. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's meant to support people who are on the ground doing like the hard, gritty work. That's like it's totally meant to, and that's what actual charity is like being in front of a person, helping them, having a relationship with them, not kind of calling the shots from a air-conditioned office in California or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Gret, this is freaking awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Now, when I Googled you, the first thing I saw was a HuffPo piece about like how this is the future of charity. You didn't lead with that.
Yeah, it just depends on the audience.
I'm not a big fan of Ariana herself or the slant there, but I mean, when we're talking about I mean, that's a big deal right now to have been highlighted by new media as a new model kind of thing. That's really awesome.
And thank you. I appreciate that.
One more thing I want to just say, my wife and I, there is an organization you mentioned that helps children. We had collected a few, and they keep getting like canceled. Like I assume that nothing horrible is happening to them, but they'll be like, Bolete is no longer able to get the $15 a month, but you can switch over to, whoever.
Yeah.
And we just had another one where it was like, I don't know, either the guy said, I don't want any more money, or they left the area, or I don't know. And we were trying to think, like, what should we do? We don't want to do less. What should we do instead? And I think I'm going to show this to my wife tonight. This is a very cool, a very intuitive, as I'm clicking around here, front end you have to it. Are you a designer, or do you have to hire people to do this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I've pretty much hired everyone to do this kind of stuff. So we hired a designer, and we have people who code the website, and we have a robust back end, and all of that is done by a team of very talented web developers, which I am not.
Okay. So you're the guy who had the vision, and what else does being CEO entail?
Well, so we're in 50 countries, but we're also pretty what do you call it? Like, we run on razor thin margins. You asked about this. Our average fee that DonorSee gets per transaction is 3.75%. So we're really, really tight, and so it's not a huge staff. And so what we're doing is I'm working with the application process. I answer about a fifth of the customer service emails. I do podcasts, and it's an all-consuming, more than 40 hours a week thing for me. I mean, I'm just working on it constantly. Yeah. So
you're kind of the face of the company, and also kind of I don't want to say the soul of the company. I don't know, Nathan, help me out here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess in this, start, you're the one that's overseeing you have your hands in everything. It's not like you're sending out and micromanaging, you're not sending people out to micromanage stuff. You're in there making sure that all of this is coming together, right? It's not like we would typically think of a CEO who kind of sits in the big office and has those under him to keep going under him and keep going under him further and further until it gets down to the bottom.
I'm assuming that you're in an office, right, with like a mahogany desk and like a leather desk plotter.
Yeah, my Lexus is parked right outside.
We had a thing where you could give to our church through your debit card, credit card, whatever bank, and use your smartphone or whatever. And I think it was charging like 3.75% or something. So I mean, that's almost like a standard fee for anybody who's taking a credit card. Gret, you had mentioned, I think, in an email, little show prep email, that you had something to say about like effective missions and giving versus like feel good, and I'd like to hear you kind of expound on that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, there's quite a lot to expound on in there. So I where could I even start? I think the basic idea is there's a lot of people who immediately learn about poverty, and they want to do something about it, and they're very passionate about that, and that is the right reaction to have. Unfortunately, what happens is if you just kind of like run guns blazing into a situation, you might think that you're about to do something amazing for people, but you actually might end up harming them. So like the classic situation is like, let's say that this happens all the time. There's an orphanage in Uganda, and they message you on Facebook, and they say, hey, we're an orphanage. I'm trying to take care of these kids. Would you mind sending me some money? And in your newfound passion, you send some money over to the other side of the world. And then they start asking for more money and more money and more money. And then over time, you realize, they've totally developed a dependency on you, right? There's like, this is a never ending thing. They're gonna only want more money as time goes on. And the money is just going into a constant bucket that is never going to be satisfied. And then the other thing that you realize is, unfortunately, a lot of orphanages are kind of just fronts for people to make a living. And the kids who are supposedly orphans all have parents, and they kind of just show up to get food every once in a while or what have you. And then sometimes there's even like worse things going on. Anyways, there's one of the things that's sad to me is, and I think, we're all Christians, it sounds like. One of the things I think Christians should be the leaders on is giving effectively. And like, we should be talking about this and discussing it more than anyone else, if we're truly going to call ourselves disciples of Jesus. And so, yeah, one of the things that's sad to me is that we're kind of flippant with our giving, or we just kind of give and we're not very critical of it. And the people who suffer when you do that are the ones who are most in need. And so by being critical and by caring about how your money is working, you can, I just think that's actually like a much more compassionate way to help those in need. But yeah, I mean, this is a huge discussion. So.
Yeah. Now there have to be people who continue to do it well with the old model.
Yes. Oh, yeah. There's tons of people. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like no one's not doing it well. I think very, very highly of many different people in this space. And DonorSee isn't the only. I don't think DonorSee is going to be this completely disruptive thing that just takes down every charity out there. I think it might.
You can dream. Take it down.
I do hope that some of the larger, more gluttonous charities might get slimmer or trimmer or whatever, and they might become more effective, and there might be more pressure on them to be more effective. But yeah, the idea isn't to just like take down everyone. So anyways, there's lots of people who are doing things well. I think highly of people who are in the providing clean water for people. I think that space is really well done most of the time. I think there's a movement called effective altruism, where they collect massive amounts of data on the way that they're performing their aid, and they actually track over time whether or not it's effective. And they have all sorts of time-tested units of measurement that they use to, like, you can test if a kid, like, you can send a book to a kid, and then or you can provide pay for a kid's education, and then a year later you can test the literacy rate of that kid versus the kid the year before, and you can see how effective your donation was. And so there's different ways of tracking all these things, and there's lots of people doing really amazing stuff out there, especially also in like the anti-malaria space. There's people providing bed nets, deworming space, the preventable disease space. There's lots of good stuff going on. And so that's one of the things that I try and talk about a lot is yeah, okay, there's lots of ineffective charity out there. Yeah, like, if you can't just go in guns blazing, but also don't forget there's lots of really good charity out there. There's lots of ways that you can help, and I highly encourage people to get involved.
Now, one thing I'm really excited about in general in missions is a trend towards empowering nationals. We have at my church 2 different refugee groups that are part of our church, and that from Burma and from Nepal. And, it's been really amazing to have the contacts. So when that big earthquake hit Nepal, we didn't have to go, all right, let's send extra money to the denomination. They'll, burn through a bunch of it just doing what they do and then send part of it. No, we Western Unioned a big chunk of cash directly to a pastor that our Burmese, or that rather our Nepali people knew. And I mean, they lived with the guy. They knew him. And apart from the fee that it was, to send the money, Western Union, it was 100%. Here you go, take it and run. And it was so much more effective. I'm wondering what if you know about what percentage of the people who are going through this application process with these projects are nationals of the country where they are, and what percentage roughly are Westerners who are there as boots on the ground working?
Yeah, so in order to be able to post on our platform, you need to have a bank account in like the US, Australia, Canada, or the UK. So everyone who is posting is some kind of Westerner. But I would say nearly 100%, in fact, I'm pretty sure it's 100%, works closely with the on-the-ground local nationals, because otherwise they would be almost utterly ineffective. So if I'll give you an example. This is like one of the best, one of the people on our platform. If you have a chance, anyone who's listening, if you have a chance to support her, you should. Her name is Amy Hathaway, and you can search through her. She's often on our front page. What Amy Hathaway does is she works with people in Tanzania, and she comes across these babies who are on the brink of starvation. You can see their pictures, like their ribs are exposed, and they're often days, weeks away from dying because they don't have enough food. I mean, it's really, really tough situations. And so what she does is she provides formula milk for these babies. One, that does two things. One, it saves their life. But then the other thing it does is it actually provides them like much needed nutrients that would have really bad long-lasting, long-term effects later on. So if they don't get this formula milk at this time in their life, they're going to have mental problems when they're teenagers and adults and so forth. So she really changes these kids' lives. But then what do you do, right? That's not a sustainable solution. You've provided milk for a kid. The kid has survived another 4, 6, 8 months. Then what? You have a baby. So Amy's solution is two parts. First, she saves the kid's life, and then she sets the kid up with a caretaker who she sets the kid's caretaker up with a business. Often the kid's parent has died, and that's why the kid is in that situation. So she'll find an aunt or someone close to her in the family and say, hey, aunt, what we'd like to do is set you up with a fruit stand. You can provide income for yourself. You can run the whole thing yourself. And then we'd also like you to take care of this kid as part of the deal. And so the aunt has buy-in to the whole process. And here's what's crazy. Amy's success rate with setting these people up with businesses is 80%, which is insane for a context like Tanzania, extremely poor and extremely unpredictable. And also you're dealing with a population with an extremely low literacy and education rate. So the work that she's doing is some of the most amazing work I've ever seen anyone do in my whole life. And I highly encourage people to check out what she does. So that's an example of someone really effectively helping those in need.
Now, are people who are involved in this necessarily also sharing the gospel, or is it also maybe partially people who are aid workers that aren't Christian missionaries, just doing things out of conscience?
Yeah, so a lot of the aid workers are Christians, and they have ministry and they evangelize in different ways. But the projects that we post are a-religious. Like we have a lot of donors who come from all over the place who just want to help. Like the way I think about it is it's an urgent situation, right? There are people who are dying. There are people who are starving. There are people like it's a really desperate kind of thing that we deal with. And so we don't do the dangling the carrot thing. We're like, hey, come, we'll give you food, but then you have to. We're going to force you to sit down and listen to this gospel message. We don't do that. None of the people on our platform do that with our projects. So really, it's anyone from any kind of background can come onto the platform and help the people. The projects are just if you want to help someone in need, if you want to do help the poor, if you want to prevent someone from starving to death or whatever it is, this is the place. This is a place for you to do that.
Very cool.
Yeah. Now, talk to me, because one of the things that you had sent us as well, talking about, effective charity versus like that feel-good charity. You also talked about comfort and meaning, people in their places of comfort and, the correlation between doing something meaningful with their lives. Talk to us a little bit about that and what you were going for there.
Yeah, so that's something that I have experienced in my own personal life. Is there seems to be a negative correlation between how comfortable I am and how meaningful how excited I am to wake up and have how fulfilled I feel that day, right? So if I wake up and I spend and I go to a bunch of nice restaurants and I buy a new outfit and I drive a nice car, or hang out on my friend's boat or something. Yeah, that's like a nice, comfortable day. I don't think that that's bad necessarily, but I also I don't go to bed at the end of the day thinking, wow, I'm like so fulfilled. Like that was just such a fulfilling, meaningful day. I never go to bed that way. But by contrast, if I have like a pretty tough day where something bad happens to one of my friends and I'm able to be there and comfort them, or something on DonorSee happens, and I'm able to step in and be a part of the solution there. Even though that's more uncomfortable, and even though I might sweat through it, and even though I might miss a meal because I'm working so hard on something, the meaning and the fulfillment that's derived from that, to me, is a better way to end the day than the comfort that that would be in contrast to that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, so it just, to me, it seems like you're talking, when Solomon talks about, in Ecclesiastes about, acquiring all this stuff and it being meaningless, and, at the end of the day, you can't take this stuff with you. And so, it's living your life out with people, in a relationship with people, and making sure that you're, supplying those needs that are there, that you're able to supply for those people. I mean, I think about, you could live a completely meaningless life having all this money and, donating 90% of it and never once having, seen the results of what goes out there and what's done with it. I mean, I think one of the great things about what you do is you actually put people in contact with other people who are able to, see and get the results of what's going on. That's one of the things that I appreciated my aunt and uncle when they would do compassion, is they would actually go overseas and visit these children that they would give money to, and they would, have opportunities to go into the villages and meet the people, and there's just more of an effective way of wanting to donate more and wanting to give more when you actually see what is going on with the money that you're giving, as opposed to just blindly giving it. And so I like how you do that and bring that in connection with people.
Yeah, that's a very important part about what DonorSee does, and also just my personal beliefs on giving, is there has to be some kind of relationship there. And so DonorSee one of the intentions behind DonorSee is to build the bridge that has kind of been stripped away by these really large bureaucratic layers. But I do want to ask you guys a question. So I think that you recognize you recognize some of what I'm saying in terms with materialism, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts about the American church and its relationship with materialism. Do you think it's? Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Thoughts about the American church and its relationship with? I think that's too broad. I mean, the American church is so segmented, and in certain corners, there's a prosperity gospel that equates what Jesus did with the achieving of great material wealth. That's a travesty. On another end, there's kind of a Gnostic view that if I do go and have a nice day and coach my kids' little league team and go home to my house and hug my wife and eat dinner, that I've wasted the day because I wasn't witnessing all day. I am continually trying to combat that, and I think most of the church is kind of in the middle, where we we have what we have. We thank God for what we have. We want to share out of what we have, give out of both out of our surplus and out of our need, and probably most of us have a little low-level liberal guilt to boot about everything we own. I don't know. I grew up in the 80s. I'm a little older than Nathan. I'm older than you. I feel like I grew up during like the very time when Marty McFly's life getting better meant he got that truck. And that was very prevalent in the I think I might have just thrown something right over both of your heads. You're following me, right?
Yeah, Back to the Future.
Okay. Yeah,
I thought there might be a chuckle or something. I don't know. It's just blank stare. So I feel like the church was pretty bought into that at the time. It was kind of the cultural norm, and the church kind of just flopped on board. And I feel like we're moving in a good direction away from that now. The fact that people like, I'm not endorsing him or anything, but people like Shane Claiborne, who are like, I'm going to go live under a bridge with homeless people, get a lot of traction, get a lot of, there's a lot of interest in how do I you have the real extreme. I have to renounce everything and throw it out the window to be faithful. But better is just kind of how do I divorce my own meaning, my own happiness from this pile of crap I'm accumulating. And I kind of feel like I look at you're a millennial, right? I look at millennials and I feel like I feel pretty good about the future because, they all have the newest iPhone or whatever. But my sense as a pastor who's kind of getting a nice cross-section of the population at the moment is that younger people are skewing more toward finding meaning in more meaningful things. And I find that to be true in the church, too. I'm fairly optimistic about the church and materialism. What do you think, Nathan?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we're headed in a direction that is causing people to be more aware of things that are going on around the world. I mean, if we think back, to that section of the 80s and earlier, where even travel outside of the country was more rare. Now you have more people, whether it's through school programs or mission trips or whatever, taking these trips and seeing what the world is actually like. And so I think people are coming back with these visions. Gret, I think you're right. I think the problem is people come back with visions and it's almost like lighting a match. If you don't have anything to sustain the flame, then it's just going to burn out quick. I remember being in high school and being in Jamaica and seeing all this poverty, and several of my friends like, I'm just going to give everything up and come down here and live. And it's like, okay, well, what's your plan after that? Well, nothing. I'm just going to live down here and be with the people. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay, but what good's that going to do? You're going to be poor along with the rest of them. I mean, unless your goal is to come down here and work as a nurse so that you can help them. I mean, just to come down here and live. And I think that's something that mission trips in particular need to do a better job with is exposing people not just to the mission projects they might have, but to the reality of the day-to-day lives of these people. But I think the access that people have to overseas and seeing what goes on is a positive thing, is it influencing so many people in a positive way to want to find out, okay, what's the right avenue to give and help in this situation? Like you keep talking about, Gret, what is a sustainable way to help someone? Because that's one of the things that I remember facing constantly was, hey, we go down and we build a playground for someone and then it gets trashed and torn to pieces. And so then the next group that comes down is also rebuilding that same playground that we just rebuilt for them. So what's going to be a more meaningful thing to do, for these kids and helping them and doing something that's going to last and move them into a future. And I remember one of the things that we saw when we were down there was a trade school was actually being built specifically for orphanages. So kids could come and they could learn how to fish. They could learn how to sew or how to mend. They could learn how to hunt or how to do these things that were necessary for the survival of the community. And so they were learning how to get beyond where they were right there into living in the future. And I think that's something that people are learning, and thankfully I think that's something that the church is learning too. We don't just go in and dump money on the problem. We go in and we show people how to get above the problem themselves so that they can sustain and live through it into the future.
Everybody's just completely bowled over by your comment, Nathan. It's silent.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
I have an observation and I have a couple more questions. Observation is this. You both say aunt instead of aunt, and that sounds super bougie. And if you're talking about poverty, you actually come across like a monocle-wearing, caviar-slurping douchebag. So maybe change that up. But the question is, one, first of all, are you married? Or do you have a family at home that's like really buying into this stuff and doing it along with you, or what's your situation family wise?
I'm getting married in 2.5 weeks.
Oh wow! Congrats, Matt.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited.
Are you sure about it? I mean, you're.
Well, yeah, I'm very sure. What kind of question is that? It's just it's kind of coming up fast, and it is a surprising thing to hear or come out on a podcast like an hour in or whatever.
And then the other thing is, when somebody signs up for this, they get approved or whatever, is part of the deal that they have to have the capability, technologically speaking, to provide the, I don't want to say proof, but like the results of this stuff, make it available to the giver?
Yeah. I mean, it's if they don't do that, then they would be kicked off the platform. We're working with a pretty loyal, dedicated group of on the ground workers, so that's never been a problem. But like, if it were, they wouldn't be able to stay there. But yeah, I mean, everyone has the internet, and they just use cell phone video to document things. So yeah.
So like, even you're saying the poorest country in the world, there's pretty reliable internet.
Well, I mean, it can go out. Yeah, it can go out for 1 or 2 days, but you can. I mean, like once a week, you could definitely get online. But like as an example, when I was in Malawi, I would go into a remote village, probably an hour outside of the city, and I would be like, everyone around me would have no cell phone, no electricity. They would be like mud huts. They would make their food on a fire, like a campfire on the ground. Like that's how they cooked all their food. Like I was around people like that, and I could whip out my phone and use the 3G network in Malawi to Skype my mom and show her like what I'm seeing. So yeah, interestingly enough, Africa is coming online faster than any other place in the world. Pretty much because it's the last place left.
Huh, that's really wild. That's surprising. I mean, I knew it was quite pervasive. And I mean, they're broadcasting from the Middle East in the caves and stuff where they're hunkered down all the time. So I guess it's not all that surprising, but interesting. So that the technology, I guess we're at a new crossroads now. I mean, that's why this is such a new thing. Is you couldn't have done this even 10 years ago, right? You
Correct,
couldn't have said, we're going to show you this girl hearing for the first time. We could probably take a Polaroid and put it in snail mail, and you'll get it in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
But this is brand new and exciting. And what's cool to me is, I mean, the enemy loves new technology, and every time there's a leap forward, it seems like the first thing to leverage it is some hideous, it's a new form of human trafficking or online pornography or whatever, some, just bondage, sinful thing to keep people in their sins. And it's nice when we take, I mean, this stuff, the very notion of technology, it belongs to us properly. God in the creation mandate said, and run with it. I built the world, you keep on building. And we need to keep on using this cutting edge stuff for his glory and to do good. So man, very, very awesome. I know we're not quite at an hour, Nathan. I got to bow out. But if you guys have more to discuss, no need to end the program.
Cool. No, I mean, I think, I really appreciate having you on, Gret. I think it was, totally beneficial. We'd love to have you back on at some other point as well, maybe get updates of what's going on with you and DonorC. And we're going to link everything on the podcast. So I'll be getting all that information from you so that we can link all this stuff so our listeners can get on and hopefully join in on this as well. And so, Zach, I think it's cool that you check this out and something that you're going to talk with your wife about, joining up with. So that's definitely awesome as well. So guys, again, total thanks for both of you, all the questions, and we're going to go ahead and sign off now. Gentlemen, we just rocked the Casbah.
These go to 11.